Many of you are probably familiar with Facebook, the social media site, and after a few years of Facebook, I branched out and started into Twitter. Now, I don't recommend Twitter for everybody, but most of you have probably heard the name Twitter. Maybe you're not really familiar with it, but this is how Twitter works. When you put a post on the social website Twitter, like on Facebook you put a post. If you put a post on Twitter, it's called a tweet. All right, does that make sense? All right, makes everybody like a little bird, I guess. And then when you post a tweet on Twitter, there's a limit to how long you can make your tweet. It can only be 140 characters long, so just a couple of sentences. It's really limited. And like on Facebook, you know, every once in a while you're scrolling through Facebook and there's a post that's like, you know, 3 chapters long. And that's fine, but on Twitter you can't do that. They just take that ability away from you. I'm not sure exactly what the reason is, other than, I guess, because they figure all Twitter users have no attention span and we're just going to keep scrolling. But anyway, the point of the 140 character limit is really to make things concise, keeping a limit on the words there. It makes people put a lot of stuff into one tweet, into one update. You really try to get everything you can into one little package of words. And if you follow people on Twitter, you follow the right people on Twitter. Obviously, you can always follow the wrong people, but if you follow the right people on Twitter, you can come across some pretty good stuff. I follow some political commentators, some sports updates, some Christian quotes, and some Bible verses and things like that. There's several good nationally known pastors that are on Twitter, and they put out some good sermons, which I preach every Sunday. I appreciate that. No, but they can put out some pretty good stuff. I used an illustration on Wednesday, an article from Tom Rainer about things people say to pastors. You know, I found that on Twitter. He had linked to it on his Twitter account. But now, there are some really awesome people that you can follow on Twitter. Twitter has actually resurrected some people from the dead. For instance, I follow Charles Spurgeon. Did you know Charles Spurgeon was on Twitter? He died in the 1800s, but he's on Twitter. I follow St. Augustine. He's been dead for about 1,600 years, but he is on Twitter, all right? I follow John Bunyan, you know, the guy who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. Well, Pilgrim is still progressing on Twitter. He's come back. I follow Robert Murray McShane, David Brainerd, Matthew Henry, and John Newton. Yes, the grace is still amazing on Twitter. Now, these guys really haven't come back from the dead, but whoever operates those Twitter accounts with those names, what they do is they take quotes from these guys and they'll put it, so I'll be going through and here's a quote from Charles Spurgeon or John Newton or something like that. So it's really, it is kind of neat. And so now I checked this out on Twitter and I didn't really follow him, but you can actually follow God on Twitter. Now it's probably not really God, but someone has an account, and I'm pretty sure it's not God. But I don't know who decided to create a Twitter account to represent God. I think I would be a little too scared to do that. I'd be a little afraid. But imagine with me, if you will, if God really did have a Twitter account, and he was tweeting, publishing tweets limited to 140 characters. What do you suppose he would say if God had a Twitter account? I'm trying not to be too trite with this, but it would have to be clear and concise, and each tweet would have to be brief, yet God doesn't waste words, does he? And so his tweets would communicate his holy character to us. What would God tweet if he was on Twitter? I think he might tweet the 10 Commandments. If they're clear, they're concise, they're limited. I haven't counted it out, but each one is probably well within the 140 character limit. Some of them are a little elaborated, but you can still put the commandment out there without the elaboration. They carry the full force of God's authority and they communicate His holy character. I think if God was on Twitter, He'd tweet the 10 Commandments. That probably wouldn't be it, but He might start there. And so look at Exodus chapter 20 with me. And we're going to look at the 10 Commandments. At Exodus chapter 20. And the 10 Commandments are kind of like Twitter because Moses had a tablet, and it was put on the tablet for him. So you got that. It was a stone tablet, but I don't know if it was online or not. But oh well. I better stop right there. Okay. That was an LG, my friend. That was an LG. The day the music died. All right. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. This evening I'm beginning a new sermon series for Sunday nights called If God Was on Twitter. All right, I'm trying. I read these and I thought these read like tweets. I mean, these are concise and they're packed full of every amount of information that you can get. And so it's a study of the 10 Commandments. If God was on Twitter tweeting the 10 Commandments and we were pulling out our tablets and looking at it, oh man, that's just a terrible analogy. But over 3,000 years ago, God gave 10 commandments to His people Israel. 3 months after departing out of Egypt, you know the story, most of you, if you're familiar with the Old Testament. They were in bondage and slavery. Moses came, and 10 plagues later, Pharaoh let his people go. They leave Egypt. They camp by the Red Sea. Pharaoh comes chasing after them. They cross the Red Sea. The waters cover the Egyptians. They see them no more. And after 3 months, Israel finds themselves camped by Mount Sinai. There, God calls to Moses out of the mountain. Back up with me to chapter 19 and look at verse 3. They're camped here. Chapter 19, verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Israel, and tell the children of Israel. And so God calls to Moses out of the mountain. 3 days later, God comes down on the mountain and manifests Himself on Mount Sinai in a special way. In verse 11, and be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. God tells them to make boundaries for the people, not to touch that mountain. So when God came down on the mountain, He called Moses up. Moses goes up to God. Chapter 19, verse 20. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by voice. God told Moses to warn the people not to come close to the mountain. And this is kind of a back and forth in chapter 19. And Moses is like, they're not coming, don't worry. They're scared to death. And apparently, at this point, that's where God gives Israel 10 commandments. I don't think it was exactly how you saw it given to Charlton Heston. If you ever watched that movie, what is that? Is it called The 10 Commandments? I think it's called The 10 Commandments. Good title. Anyway, so God writes the 10 Commandments personally on 2 tables or tablets of stone. In Exodus chapter 32, verses 15 and 16, we see him say, he tells us that, and also Deuteronomy 5. Moses carried those down to the people. But when God gave these commandments, He actually said them to everybody. There at the foot of this mountain, God shows up on the mountain. Not like God wasn't there before, but it's a special manifestation of God's presence. It's thick smoke, it's thundering, it's lightning, earthquakes, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. The people are scared to death. And keep a finger here and look with me at Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy covers the same material here. Moses is reiterating what happened. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 12. The Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of His words, but saw no similitude. Only ye heard a voice, and He declared unto you His covenant, which He commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments, and He wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. So back here in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, and God spake all these words, saying, here are the children of Israel at the foot of the mountain, and God's voice actually comes out of the mountain and tells them personally the 10 commandments. At the same time, God is writing and speaking at the same time. He's writing these commandments on 2 tablets or 2 tables of stone. The people were so afraid, wouldn't you be? They were so scared at that point that in Exodus chapter 20, verse 18, they have a request for Moses. And it says, all the people saw the thunderings and lightnings and noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So they run away. Verse 19, they said to Moses, speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And so they're saying, Moses, you go get the message from God and come bring it to us. We can't hear this. We're not holy enough for this. We're scared to death. And that's exactly what Moses would do from then on. And so Moses cast the 2 original stone tablets in Exodus chapter 32. Just go forward a little bit. He's up in the mountain. God gives him these tablets. He's coming down from the mountain. And the children of Israel have made a golden calf. And Exodus chapter 32 and verse 19, all right? And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hand and brake them beneath the mount. So there at the foot of the mountain, he throws down the 10 commandments. And actually, here's a trivia question that you can answer later on as a smart aleck. Who was the first person to break the 10 commandments? Well, it was Moses, all right? He throws them down, and yes, if you drop your tablet, it will crack, all right? And that's a little joke for John, because I dropped my phone, and it cracked, all right? Anyway, he throws them down in anger, and then God rewrote the 10 commandments. He got a new one in Exodus chapter 34 and verse 1. God says to Moses, and the Lord said to Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. Verse 28, and let's see here. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, did neither eat bread nor drink water, and he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. So it's written with the finger of God. So that's what's going on in Israel when the 10 Commandments were given. What has been the impact of these 10 Commandments on society, on this world? Well, to understand that impact, I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine a world where there is no theft or murder. Think about that for a second. No theft or murder. There would be no need for armies, no need for security systems or door locks, no needs for weapons or police. There would be no wars and no crimes. The aims of every diplomat in the world would be achieved immediately. Men, women, children alike could walk everywhere, day or night, without any worry of harm coming to them. You would never have to worry about being in the wrong part of town and having a problem. Imagine a world with no theft and no murder. Imagine a world in which nobody coveted anything that belonged to somebody else. There would be no envy or hard feelings over material things. Occupy Wall Street would have never happened. There would be no problems like that or hard feelings over. Imagine a world in which children always honored and obeyed their parents. They would never, ever go against what their parents said. They would always be respectful and thankful and grateful. Can you imagine, parents, a world like that? There'd be no tantrums in the supermarket checkout aisle when Junior doesn't get a piece of candy. There would be every child would have their homework done on time for school because mom told them to do it the night before. Chores would always be done without question and without complaining in a world in which children honored their parents. Imagine a world without adultery, without stories about Ashley Madison or different things like that. Jealousy would disappear. Most politicians would still have their career and homes would be kept together. And we would only know Bill Clinton as a president that was bad at policy. Imagine, that was not in the script. Imagine that kind of a world. What are you imagining? You're imagining heaven, right? You're imagining the kingdom of God. You're imagining a perfect world. That is the impact that the 10 Commandments should have had. But they didn't. The 10 Commandments have never been fully, their impact has never been fully realized. Partially, there's been a very minor impact of the 10 Commandments, and we can see that in what is now called Western civilization. The resulting parts of that would be the abolition of things like slavery and seeing the rise of rights for women and political freedom and different types of things that we enjoy in modern Western civilization. A lot of that has to do with founding principles in our nation that reflect the principles of the 10 Commandments. But that's just very minor, why hasn't the full impact of the 10 Commandments ever been realized? Well, it's because many people don't think they're relevant. That's old. Yeah, we learned that in Sunday school. Not a big deal. Forget about it. Take it down off the courtyard wall. It's not relevant to us. You see, there's a catch in the whole thing, and that is this: the 10 Commandments don't stand alone. They don't work without one thing. They are predicated. The 10 Commandments are predicated on the idea that they were given by an authority greater than any king or general or government or governing body could ever have. They were given by God. And that's what makes them relevant. The 10 Commandments are relevant for us today because of their author, because of the weight of the authority behind every word. If God was on Twitter, there's a feature on Twitter because there are a lot of fake accounts. You know, I follow a fake account of the White House press secretary, and I know that the real press secretary is not running that account because the White House comes out looking bad every time they tweet something. But there's lots of fake accounts, but there are celebrities that have real accounts. For instance, being a Dallas Cowboys fan, I do follow Tony Romo on Twitter, and most of his tweets get intercepted, but come on, guys. Anyway, but it has a little check mark beside it, and it's been verified that this is the real Tony Romo. And so he doesn't really tweet that much, and he won't answer all my direct messages. But anyway, if this is the idea here is that if just anybody with the name Tony Romo on their thing, on their account, tweets something, I know it doesn't mean anything because it's not the official. It doesn't have that. There's a little sign. I should get one, like the official Chad Buman. All like 35 of my followers would understand that. Anyway, but you know if it's really the real celebrity, like Santa Claus, the real Santa, not the mall one, he's probably got one on his. But anyway, it's a little blue check mark. Anyway, the author of the Ten Commandments is what makes them relevant. Why is it of the utmost importance for us to focus on the fact that God gave the Ten Commandments? Look with me at verse 1. Before he gives all these Ten Commandments, before he lays this out, the Bible says this, and it's very important. And God spake all these words. He's very specific, and he's very bold to say here, God is the one speaking. Why is it so important for us to focus? This is the foundational part of the Ten Commandments. It's not the first commandment. It's not the seventh commandment. It's not the 10th commandment. That is the foundation. The foundation of the Ten Commandments is found in verse 1. God said it. That's why it's relevant for us tonight. But why is that so important for us to understand and to focus on the fact that God said it? Well, it's this. Think about it this way. Because if it wasn't God who said it, then murder wouldn't be wrong. Well, you say, well, I don't need God to tell me that murder is wrong. I already believe that murder is wrong. Yes, but how do you know murder is wrong? You may believe it's wrong, and I understand that. But how do you know it's wrong? Can't you believe something that's not true? Yes. So you need God to tell you that is wrong, that there's right and wrong. Without God, right and wrong are nothing but personal preferences. In the 20th century, millions were murdered by the Nazi and communist regimes, and those people justified their murder because they were doing it for the good of the fatherland or for the good of the state and whatever line they had swallowed from their leaders, and mass murder was in style for a while. And it wasn't considered bad. Think about this. Today, people murder their children in abortion. And they say it's legal. It's not wrong. And it's not even murder, but it's murder. And God says it's wrong. So the Ten Commandments are relevant for us today because of their author. God says these things are right or wrong. And because God said it, we can absolutely put our trust in we put our trust in Christ for salvation, but as far as a guide for living, these Ten Commandments are a great guide. The Ten Commandments are relevant for us today because of their author, and because God gave those commandments, we honor them for Him. The Ten Commandments are not a list of things that you keep so that you can have a better life. That is not the goal of the Ten Commandments. Oh, it is the result. It is part of the result. The goal of the Ten Commandments and living by them, we live by grace through faith in Christ. I want you to understand that. I'm not saying that we keep the Ten Commandments to be saved, but as a guide for life, these Ten Commandments, we don't keep them to make our lives better or to get something out of God. We keep them because we love Him, the author. It carries weight for us. Look at verse 2. It says, God spake all these things, saying, I am the Lord. Who's God? Thy God, right? Which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So, He's their God. You know why He's their God? Because He saved them. Here they are in Egypt. They are in bondage, and they can't get out. And God, by a mighty arm, through 10 gruesome plagues, brought them out, brought them through the Red Sea. There was no question they didn't do it. Only God could save that nation that way. And think about this. You were dead in your trespasses and sins. You were a slave to sin, Romans chapter 6. You were a slave in sin, and God brought you out. He saved you. And you did not keep 10 commandments in order for Him to save you. Israelites did not have the 10 commandments when they came out of Egypt. That was God saving them by grace through faith. And God saved you by grace through faith. He took you out of bondage in Egypt, took you out of the bondage of sin, and brought you into His life and into His freedom. And because of that, because He's your God, that's why we look at 10 commandments and say, this is relevant to me. I will honor them for Him. You know, people who know what is wrong do it anyway. You know people like that. Look in the mirror, right? I found one this morning when I was brushing my teeth. I looked right in the mirror. There he was, brushing his teeth. And there are people that they know what's wrong, they do it anyway. Why? Because they believe they can. Honestly, they believe they can. A lot of times they think nobody's watching. But the Christian, we honor God knowing He sees us all the time. He saved us. He's our God. And here's God about to give him 10 commandments. He says, I'm saying all these. I am the Lord your God who saved you. Now here's some stuff I want you to know. Here's a couple tweets. All right? And so the 10 commandments are relevant today because of their author. We keep them. We honor them for Him. And because God gave the commandments, we honor, because He's the author, we honor those commandments, not just for Him, but because of Him. Because of Him. Like I said, we don't keep them in order to be saved, verse 2. He saved us, so we keep them because we're saved. You think about this. The law of Moses, all of it, was added to the Abrahamic covenant. It was something that was tacked on. It was not something that replaced the covenant that God made with Abraham. You understand, when Israel was in bondage to Egypt, they were not under the law of Moses. There was no law of Moses. There was no Moses. And so what was their relationship to God? Well, they did have some problems. I mean, they were never really great in their relationship with God. But they were operating on a covenant. And it was the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I want you to keep a finger here and turn to Galatians chapter 3. Galatians chapter 3. And this, I hope, will open your understanding to the relationship that the Old Testament law has to us as believers, and it should have had to the children of Israel, and maybe did for a while before the Pharisees came along. But Galatians chapter 3, the law was added to the Abrahamic covenant of faith. It was never intended to provide salvation. There was no salvation by keeping the law in the Old Testament, and then Jesus did away with that, and now it's by faith. All right? There was never a salvation by keeping the 10 commandments. It's not like that's how it was in the Old Testament, but now it's different in the New Testament. No, salvation has only ever been by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. And here we see that point here. The law is added to the Abrahamic covenant. The law was not meant to delete the faith of Abraham. It came by way of insertion, not deletion. God was giving people a guide. Look at this, Galatians chapter 3 and verse 19. Wherefore serveth the law? What's the law doing? He asks. It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. Go back to verse 18. What's he reacting to? For if the inheritance be of the law, it is no more of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. And so here's what Paul is arguing. Here's what he's saying. Abraham received God's promises by faith not by the law. And then so he says, well, then he asks in verse 19, well, what's the purpose of the law? And he says, well, God added it because of transgressions. Israel was not living right, and so God gave them some guidelines to live by. Pretty rough, pretty solid guidelines. But he didn't say, all right, I'm taking out faith now, and now you're going to live under this law with no faith. You're just going to keep all these rules. That's not what God did when Moses brought in the law. The law does not disannul the Abrahamic covenant. And so he says in verse 17, "And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before God in Christ, the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul that it should make the promise of none effect." So the promise was given to Abraham. The law did not take that away. The law was wrongly accepted by Israel and thus passed a death sentence upon them, a curse that held back the blessing of the Abrahamic covenant. In Christ, the curse is removed. And Abraham's blessing here is released to faith. Galatians chapter 3, again, verse 13. "Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. It is written, Cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree, that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith." Think about how God has worked over the thousands of years. He made a promise to Adam and Eve that the seed of the woman was going to have his heel bruised by the serpent, but he was going to crush the serpent's head. That is Jesus Christ crushing Satan on the cross. And then God came to Abraham and said, "In thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." That was by faith. 430 years later, Israel is saved. They come up out of Egypt, and God says to them, here are 10 commandments. Paul in Galatians kind of elaborates on that, and he says, this was added. There was no subtraction of faith. This was added to Abraham's covenant. Why? Because of transgressions. I was giving them some guide points to, like a father says to his son, don't do that anymore. Stop picking your nose in public. Stop. I don't know, doing those stuff that kids do. And it was a little more serious than that, but. You get the picture, right? It was added because of transgressions. Nothing was taken away. So we go back to this in Exodus chapter 20. And for the next few weeks, we are going to be looking at these 10 commandments, these tweets, if you will, to try and not be too trite, but these tweets by God. Why are they relevant? It says, "And God spake all these words." God said it. It's the author that makes it relevant. You have a favorite author, someone you like to read? And you may go into Barnes & Noble or a used bookshop or something like that, and your eyes will scan and pass over so many books that you don't even consider. But then you see that one name on the spine, and maybe it's Charles Dickens, or maybe it's, I don't know, somebody else. Ernest Hemingway, I don't know. You see that name and you think, well, I've read one of those books and that's pretty good. You know what just happened? The author made it relevant to you. And so the author makes the 10 Commandments every day relevant for us. Let's pray.